The interesting thing about the question that is the title of this video is I would guess that for almost everyone watching this right now, the answer is obvious. Obvious, but not always the same. The first time someone asked me that question, it was in the chat of one of my live streams. My reflexive answer was, what? Of course not. What the hell is wrong with you? I mean, seriously, I'm all for empowering the homeless. I just don't see how it's empowering to give cops an excuse to kill more of them. Law enforcement mistreats homeless people enough. Is knowing the homeless person they're about to interact with is packing heat going to cause the police to treat them with more care and respect? Or are they just going to start shooting first? Or shoot first more often. I get the impression they shoot first occasionally as things are. So, if the idea is to empower the homeless, arming them ain't gonna get it. There's also the fact that we're excessively armed as a society in general, and I don't think give them guns is a rational solution to any problem. Quite the opposite. We need to be pursuing ways of taking guns out of circulation, not adding more. That was my answer the first time I was asked that question. I think at the time I tried to be considerate and diplomatic about it, but I basically said that I thought that was nuts and smacked of the kind of shallow and reckless accelerationist fantasy that some of my less thoughtful friends on the extreme far left like to indulge in from time to time. But then, a little while later, I remembered where this idea of arming the homeless came from, or at least how it was popularized. Tom Morello's guitar. For almost 30 years, Morello's most recognizable guitar has been this one, the one with adorable white hippos on it, and scrawled in red over the top of them, the phrase, "Arm the Homeless." After I remembered that, I got to thinking, was I too quick to dismiss the idea of arming the homeless? I mean, Morello isn't a prophet or anything, but I dig Rage Against the Machine, and not only do I like their music, I admire them for using their music and their fame and their wealth to encourage people to get involved in politics, to protest, to support workers and immigrants. If Tom Morello is serious about arming the homeless, maybe I should take another look at it. So, is Tom Morello serious about arming the homeless? He spoke about it a few years ago in an interview with Jason Greenough for Portland, Oregon newspaper Street Roots. Rage Against the Machine was preparing to play what would turn out to be a legendary show at the Whiskey A Go-Go in 1992 when Morello came up with the idea of adding the phrase to his guitar. Morello explained to Greenough, quote, "That was my sort of homemade guitar, which I had drawn these cute white hippopotamuses on, and I decided to take a magic marker and thought of the phrase, kind of echoing the provocateur artistry of the Paris Commune in the back of my mind. In the city of Los Angeles, where you have Bentleys and Rolls Royces driving by these homeless tent cities, it just felt like a fine, provocative, artistic statement." In an interview with Henry Yates for Guitarist last year, Morello elaborates a bit, saying of the slogan, quote, "To me, it's the juxtaposition of these happy floating hippopotami and this kind of situationist, outrageous screed written on the guitar. It represented pretty well who I am." In other words, by having Arm the Homeless on his guitar, Morello is definitely intending to make a statement, just not the statement that we should literally be passing out guns to the unhoused, which is not to say Morello doesn't actually care about the plight of the homeless. Elsewhere in that interview for Street Roots, he says, quote, "We are an incredibly wealthy country, but there are people living on the street with no roof over their heads who are looked at as sort of a subset of humanity that is even beneath the dignity of even making eye contact with them. In our country, they're shunted to the side as refuse. It's infuriating and needs to be addressed." So the guy who popularized the saying, "Arm the Homeless," is using it as an intentionally provocative artistic statement and a way of representing his activist, revolutionary point of view, but not as a specific, literal call to action. I can get behind that, but in the nearly 30 years since Morello wrote Arm the Homeless on his guitar, has anyone else proposed it as a serious policy? A few years ago, Brian Ellison, a member of the Libertarian Party from Michigan, who has also pursued failed runs for Congress and the presidency of the United States, ran for the U.S. Senate. This run was also unsuccessful. Like I said, he's in the Libertarian Party, where failure is not just an option, it's a way of life. But he garnered some attention during the campaign for his plan to arm homeless people. He even started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money to buy shotguns for homeless people, a campaign which was shut down by GoFundMe because, in case I forgot to mention it, it was to raise money to buy shotguns for homeless people. Ellison's political views appear to be a few degrees less offensive than a typical right-wing libertarian jerk-off, but only a few. And even when he finds himself on the right side of an issue, it's usually for the worst possible reason. For example, he opposes the NRA, but because he feels it doesn't support gun rights enough. He's mostly an unserious dipshit who deserves to be laughed at, like I said, a libertarian, but he actually makes some good points with his Arm the Homeless proposal. When asked about the plan in a 2018 interview with Vice, Ellison explains, quote, "We wanted to bring attention to the fact that the homeless are so disenfranchised and victimized and exploited. Not only are they the victims of violent criminals, they are victims of the state. It's a shame when the state makes it a crime to ask for a handout or makes it illegal to occupy an unoccupied public space. There's been a war on the homeless for a long time." Good point. Homeless people are not only neglected, but also victimized and persecuted by both private citizens and the state. It is outrageous, and something does need to change. Ellison also points out how negative reactions to his proposal highlight the hypocrisy of many people's beliefs about gun control. People claim to support the right to unrestricted gun ownership, but they draw the line at certain groups of people, the homeless, for example. Of course, going back to that right but for the worst reason thing, Ellison's point in exposing this hypocrisy is to argue that we actually should have unrestricted gun ownership, whereas I might point out the same hypocrisy in order to argue for how nuts the idea of unrestricted gun ownership is. But hey, I'm not a fucking lunatic firearm fetishist. What do I know? When asked if he's worried arming the homeless would lead to an increase in gun violence, Ellison gives his best answer of the interview, saying, quote, "Well, how do we address that with the police and military populations? A third of police are domestic abusers, and obviously many of them have substance abuse problems. Nobody seems to have an issue with them being armed." And then he goes off into some more libertarian bullshit about how gun ownership is a natural right and the government shouldn't have the power to determine who is mentally stable enough to exercise that right. And before I know it, I'm making this gesture with my hand, the internationally recognized sign indicating that a libertarian is talking. But before that, the bit about how a lot of people who think it's outrageous to suggest arming homeless people aren't bothered at all about arming cops and soldiers, many of whom are obviously not to be trusted with firearms, that's really good. But really, the bit of this interview with Ellison that is the most relevant to our subject comes at the end of the Vice piece when Ellison is asked point blank, "Is arming the homeless an actual serious idea?" Ellison replies, "I'm serious from the aspect that it's a worthy cause. I mean, this isn't a hill I'm going to die on, but I think there's kind of a philosophical bent to it. It's not enough to just say this is ridiculous or this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard, which is all over my social media. I want people who are opposed to this to think about why they're opposed." And then, you guessed it, he lapses into more rhetorical masturbation about how if you oppose arming the homeless because you don't support the natural right to self-defense, you should own that, which is a philosophical slide gun nuts often attempt, seeking to link the right to self-defense with the right to own a gun, as though you can't support one without supporting the other. I assure you, you can. But the overall point of Ellison's answer is strong, I think, and also suggests that his proposal ultimately isn't meant to be taken any more literally than the one scrawled on Tom Morello's guitar. Ellison, like Morello, is not saying arm the homeless because he wants to literally arm the homeless. I mean, in a sense, he does. He wants to arm everyone. He's a shithead libertarian gun nut, and he did try to start a GoFundMe to buy guns for homeless people, but even if that had succeeded, it would have been a small-scale publicity stunt, not a large-scale social policy. Ellison is saying arm the homeless primarily to make a point about how we respond to the notion of arming members of a disenfranchised community versus how we respond, or more often don't respond, to gun-toting agents of the state who, statistically speaking, represent a greater threat to public safety than the homeless. The truth is, unless your goal is to give the police an excuse to kill a whole bunch of them, the last thing we should be doing for the homeless is arming them. Are they a vulnerable population in desperate need of empowerment? Yes. Is passing out guns a good way to empower them? No, of course not, especially not in a society like the United States where guns are already absurdly ubiquitous and the problem of unaccountable police violence is well established. You want to give homeless people something? So do I. I want to give them houses and money and medical care, things that could actually help them. And before someone says, oh, sure, but just giving houses and money to homeless people is a fantasy, it's no more of a fantasy than giving them guns. At least if we gave houses and money to homeless people, it would actually do them some good. Increasing the number of guns in circulation in a country where there are already several 100 million too many doesn't do anyone any good. So, can I get behind arm the homeless as an artistic statement meant to provoke a reaction or represent a commitment to challenging the status quo? Hell yes. Can I support it as a theoretical proposal intended to expose and challenge double standards in our thinking regarding the marginalized versus those in power? Absolutely. But should we actually, literally arm the homeless? What? Of course not. The hell is wrong with you?